Rightio, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Riverina Rebellion, episode 9. I'm your host, Dean McRae. I'm your Riverina candidate for the upcoming federal election, representing the Liberal Democrats, soon to be Liberty Democrats, after the High Court decision the other day. Anyone who doesn't know, no, we're not being deregistered. No, we don't not exist. And no, we're not going to call ourselves anything completely ludicrous. We do want to keep generally the pseudo Lib Dem name. That's who we are, and we've built 20 years of generally pretty good policy, I think, around that name. Tells us an awful lot to see the federal government terrified of us to the point that they want to take the word Liberal off us. It's a generic term. I think it's a travesty for freedom and liberty in this country when a word can be commandeered by the powers that be. But anyway, that's a discussion for a different day. Tonight on Riverina Rebellion, I've invited a guest who's become a really good friend over the last 6 months. I suppose we've sort of got to know each other pretty well. Nick Samios is our Lib Dem candidate for Barowra. He's an all-round nice guy, all-round good guy, a bit of a doer. And look, he's joined us tonight to have a bit of a chat. We're going to touch base, see how his campaign's going, compare notes, see where we're both up to. We're going to talk about some high fuel prices and some other sort of goings-ons. And Nick has blessed me with piles and piles of charts and screens and stuff that he's going to sort of share with everybody tonight, because Nick's also a bit of a doer and he's red hot on this topic. Mate, how are you tonight, Nick?
Mate, I'm very well. I have to take issue with you with one of the words that you just used. And you said that liberal is a generic term. And I don't think it's generic at all. I mean, I'm sure for legal purposes it probably is. But it actually has a very specific definition in terms of classical liberalism. And, under classical liberalism, there's an adherence to free markets and small government and personal liberty, which and we believe that we've got a very good claim on that word, and I believe that others don't. But I guess we've had that discussion.
I know the others you're talking about, and I don't think too many people who are going to either follow you or me are going to be overly in love with the current guise of the Liberal Party. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Robert Menzies, who certainly did have some remarkable qualities from what I've read. Obviously, I didn't know the bloke personally, but seems to have some remarkable qualities. He built what was a great concept, and it's just been bastardised and watered down to the insipid show that's currently the Liberal Nationals Coalition. I make no apologies for taking issue with them. I don't think they represent anything that they've got on the box, and the fact that they've taken this term, I suppose, off us using the High Court to do it. It just shows where their head's at. It's disappointing.
Well, I think, Dean, that the problem is that there was a time when politicians believed in something. They had an ideology, whether or not that was a liberal ideology or a Nationals ideology, the country ideology, of course, what the Nationals used to be, or whether it's a Labor ideology or a Greens ideology. And I think that if you're adhering to one of those ideologies, when your voters vote for you, they're voting for that ideology, but that's no longer the case. And some of this little discussion on economics, I'm hoping not to put you to sleep on, I think goes to that point, that we're now living in an era where, to me, government spending it's an auction for the votes, right? So Labor and Liberal are auctioning. There's this median voter theory, right, where there's a bell curve, and most of the voters are in the bell curve. And so the reason why Labor and Liberal are so close at the moment is because they're all pitching for that bell curve and appealing to the middle of that bell curve. And so really, because their policies are more or less the same, they're both trying to throw all this money at the voter. And they've lost ideology. It's all about getting the votes because they're career politicians. They love all the benefits, and they love having, they're working up their career. They're a nobody on the back bench, and then they're a junior minister, and who knows, one day they can be prime minister. And as long as they keep buying votes, and that's all that matters. Ideology's got nothing to do with it.
Isn't that a sad state of affairs, mate? It's like parents bribing their kids with McDonald's. It's
exactly
just done on a larger scale. except the parents have actually earned the money, whereas our government has basically extorted it out of the population. It's a disgusting state of affairs. Anyway, a lot of that's the reason why I ended up in the political game. I saw all these political parties running around. I saw politicians lying their asses off. And, it always offended me how dishonest they were. I'd rather you make a mistake and say, oh, buggered that up, or, look, that's kind of what I stand for, good, bad, indifferent. These guys don't do that, and it does my simpleton brain in, and I sit there and I go, you know what, I'm happy to fight these guys. And I found the Lib Dems around 2012, I think, and I've been quite happy to work with the team ever since. And we haven't got everything right all the time. We would never claim to, because we're not that silly and full of shit. But that's one of the other qualities of this, is we can go, oh, well, maybe we did get something wrong. We don't get them wrong that often, because our policy guys are pretty spot on, mate. They're very impressive.
One of the wisest things I've heard you say, and one of the things that certainly struck a chord with me the most, I think it was in a tweet actually, and I want to find that tweet, because I plan on using it at my campaign launch. It was something to do with, actually, there's a slide coming up, but one of the other parties had stolen some of our ideas. And you made the comment, you wish they'd steal all of our ideas, and then you and I can go back to actually having a normal life and, spending more time with our families and, playing a bit of golf and all that sort of stuff, rather than doing this. It's a little bit like we've seen them make a mess and no one else is picking it up, and now we got to do it. We'd rather not. Please steal our policies. Steal all of them.
Oh, mate, I don't care which party. If the Libs turn around and they want to own the word, how about you start owning some of the policies? And I can go back to not being politically active. I'd love to just be spending all day, every day with my kid, playing football, going camping, fishing, shooting things, having a good time. But instead, if I want him to have the future that I envision for him in a free society, I have to get involved. I would feel guilty if I didn't. So here we are, Nick, trying to fight the good fight, and Nick's got a campaign launch coming up next week. Let's plug it now, Nick. Tell us about your campaign launch. Bugger it. I don't have a too strict a format for this sort of thing.
That's okay. Mate, what I've got, so on the 31st of March, we have a lunch at a restaurant called On Sunset in Parramatta, and I think we've now got a Parramatta candidate. And she did say to me at Daniel Lukowitz's launch, "What are you doing in Parramatta?" I felt like it was something out of American Gangster, where I wasn't allowed to cross the bridge into Jersey. But as it happens, the owner of the restaurant that we're using lives in Dural, and that's fair and square in my electorate. So I'm supporting the owner of the restaurant. It's a great venue. We've got what we've got is it's a bit of a networking theme as well. We've got tables of 10, lots of professionals coming along. But more importantly, I guess, or as importantly from a party point of view, I'm going to be launching my campaign. We've then got someone, we're not quite sure who, but we're going to have a by way of a budget reply, because it's the 31st of March. The budget comes out on the 29th. And we're going to have someone, I can't announce who was going to be doing that just yet, replying to that. Then we've got Ross Cameron, who I'm hoping is going to inject his usual colour. He's going to be interrogating the 5 Senate candidates from around Australia. And I use the word interrogating. I don't want to interview him. I don't want him to interview them. I want him to interrogate them, because what we're pitching to Australia really is a block of 5 senators, 5 Liberal Democrat senators, who, if Albo gets in, and people are saying that he could, or even if Morrison gets in, we need those people. And it's not, I was thinking about it, it's not about keeping the bastards honest. I feel as though when the Democrats said keep the bastards honest, that's a bit soft for me. What I want to see is I want to hold the blowtorch to the bastards. And I want to make sure I want Ross Cameron to interrogate them. So.
And we've got 5 fantastic Senate candidates announced. I know of at least one more that will be announced in the next week or so. We've got obviously Campbell Newman, who's come over from the Liberal Party. He's had some epiphanies as life has changed and things have gone on, and he sees great value.
Well, he'll be there online.
He'll be there digitally.
Yeah.
So now, and Campbell, we haven't always agreed on everything, but that's a big part of being a Lib Dem. You're allowed to disagree on stuff and still work together on things for a better Australia.
There's no touching of the face or hair, apart from that.
Yeah. Well, that's it. David Limbrick's going to be in attendance digitally as well, is he, or is he in person?
Oh, yeah, David Limbrick digitally. But yes, I thought you were going to
So,
steal my thunder and announce who the MC is. You tell us who the MC
oh
is.
no. We'll just do the rundown of our Senate candidates first,
Yeah,
because
okay.
why not?
Okay.
So David Limbrick, you all know, has been an absolute champion for freedom and liberty, taking on Dan Andrews head on.
Well, he's known as the unofficial leader of the opposition in Victoria.
Yep, he has been an absolute champion, and I've been so proud to be a member of David's party, or not David's party, but with the work that he's done. In New South Wales, we have John Ruddick, who's come over also from a long history with the Liberal Party, going, this doesn't represent me anymore. I'm going with these guys. I 100% believe John Ruddick's a true believer in the live and let live, and I'm really, really proud to be supporting him. Kenelm Tonkin, long-term 30-year member of the Liberal Party. He put his hands
Young
up.
Liberal of the Year.
I'm out of it. Yeah, it was the Liberal of the Year at one stage. He's our South Australian candidate. Kate Fantanel's a great long-term member of the party. She's gorgeous. We love her. She's challenging that other communist lunatic, Mark McGowan, over in Western Australia. And I love Kate. Anybody over there that's watching, get on, support her. Any of those 5 candidates, jump on and support, please. That's the big thing here. That's what we've got to do. We need to get strong.
I don't know Kate, but I would love to see her in the Senate, because I tell you what, they're in big trouble, from nearly as I can tell. Because if anyone's principled is going to adhere to the absolute libertarian, she looks fantastic. So that's
mate.
Great.
She's an absolute champion. So you better announce who your MC is going to be for the day.
Just about 20 minutes ago, I received an email from David Leyonhjelm, who was the famous senator for the Liberal Democrats. How long ago? And it's funny, I didn't really know much about the Liberal Democrats. I remember when the Liberal Democrats, when he got elected to the Senate, but he gave he gave many great speeches. But my favourite speech was when he thanked the smokers of Australia for contributing something like $6 billion over and above the health costs of smoking, for the massive contribution they made to the budget. So it's fantastic. So
it's going to be a cracking event. So anyone who can get on, check out all Nick's links. I'll share it on the New South Wales page. I'll be sharing it everywhere I can get hold of. If you can get to the event, get to the event. Was it $200 a ticket or $2,000?
$200 a head. But look, if you're a big swinger, buy a table, $2,000 a table, and bring all your corporate friends. There's going to be lots of accountants and lawyers and all that sort of stuff there. Like I say, it's a lunchtime, in the style of a corporate event, if you like. And go to nicksamios.com.au, nicksamios.com.au, and you'll see a little waggling box on the screen, and you click there to buy tickets.
Look, the important thing for everybody to remember is whether we like it or not, these things cost money. And most of us do it out of our own pocket. So we fundraise where we can. So if you can dig deep and you want to help out, and you think that Nick or myself, or you just generally want to support the party federally or state, reach out, chuck a couple of bucks in the tin. It does help. Buys cornflakes, T-shirts, flies the flag. So it's fantastic. And the other big news, I suppose, is John Larter has been announced as our Deputy Senate candidate. He's finally come out. We sort of had it in the pipeline for a little while. John's not nobody's everybody's cup of tea, but John's got this great history of community service, paramedic, freedom fighter. He's certainly become quite well known during this COVID lockdowns and for his stance on the mandates. He's come on board and he's coming charging. I mean, the guy's been fighting floods up near Lismore. Volunteering his time up there. I mean, the guy is an absolute superhero. We're proud to have him. So that was a great announcement this week. It's bloody all happening with the Lib Dems, mate. It's
we're on a roll. We're on a roll. Watch out.
We sure are. Let's get down to these numbers, mate. You've worked hard on these graphs, mate. Tell us what you're going to.
I'll tell you what. I just want to go. What I've got here is some slides from the very latest Reserve Bank of Australia slide pack. They call it a chart pack. It comes out every month. So we've got the very latest chart pack. And I can keep talking to these until you want to stop. So I've got plenty of them. We can get through them quickly because I'm not going to bore everyone to tears.
We try to keep this little bit of program to about 30 minutes. Otherwise, everybody goes, these guys talk too much.
Mate, we won't. We'll get through them because I'm not an economist, okay? So I'm not making forecasts. I'm not making predictions. I just want to show people what's going on because some of these stats are real eye-openers.
here's the thing I keep throwing at people. I'm not an economist either, but I know, like all hell, that fuel prices are through the roof.
Yeah,
I know that
well,
agricultural chemical prices are all modified and changing. There's a hell of a lot going on. You don't need to be an economist to know that things are hitting your pockets. Now, we've been talking about getting rid of fuel excise now in this party for God on 20 years, certainly the 10 that I've been involved.
it's
Why
in our
is it
DNA.
44.2 cents
Yeah.
per litre goes straight to the government. So if the government did want to cut down your fuel prices, they could drop it by 44.2 cents a litre tomorrow. Stroke of a pen. I
It's
don't
not
need
just
it.
it's not just fuel prices, Dean, because most things in Australia are, by the time it gets to the supermarket, it's got there by truck, right? So
Yep.
the transport prices are up, and then we've got the truckie, the subbies that are driving the trucks under pressure again, and to try and become more cost effective and all the rest of it. So there's so many repercussions.
It's crazy. Let's jump on this.
Okay.
I'm going to bring the screen up.
Yep,
Now, this is
beautiful.
my first go at sharing a screen in a live stream, because we all know I'm tech basic. Let's see if I get it right.
I'll be very gentle with you. Okay, so I've got to catch up here because I've got what the screen has got them here. So what we've got here, the first slide, is GDP growth. Now, the reason I've got that is you can see, I've just lost it, just one sec. There we go. You can see GDP, since the early 90s. Over to the, you can see where growth came off during the GFC. You can see that when COVID first came along, there was a massive dip in growth, and now we've got this big spike in growth, right? GDP spiking. It was up over 80% one quarter there, you may recall. And so everybody's saying the economy's going fantastic, isn't it? Look at GDP. But if you just go to the next slide now, let's have a look what GDP is made up of. There we go. Now, I don't know about you, Dean, but I find that a little bit disturbing. Our GDP for the September quarter there, sometimes these figures lag because by the time they collate the data. But have a look what the biggest contribution to GDP is.
I was just about to say the first one that pops into my head is government's claiming the jersey.
Well, mate, government is nearly 50% of GDP. I mean, why is it that government, we're supposedly not a socialist society. Why is it that government is responsible for 50% of GDP in this country? Now, the next question that you might ask yourself is, where does all the money come from? And what does it impact on us? What does it matter if the government is spending? Now, the first thing I would point out is, we saw that previous graph where there's this big spike in GDP. Where would that be if the government wasn't borrowing heavily and printing money to keep things up? So what that means is the can's getting kicked down the road. We're living in this dream world, if you ask me. Now, if you go to the next slide, we'll see where all the money's coming from for the GDP. And this is a famous slide. Who put this slide together, Dean? I'm getting confused these days. Was it LDP?
Yeah, I imagine it was the LDP. It's been. Yeah. I think I've seen 2 or 3 other parties using it though.
That's right.
In their marketing. And again, that goes back to our philosophy that I'm quite happy keep stealing our ideas, keep stealing our stuff, guys, so I can go back to my normal life.
Well, you and I know perfectly well who put this together. And but what it shows there is the Liberals managed to get rid of the Australian debt. And, it's interesting. I think we had Peter Costello was the last treasurer that had a budget surplus. The last Labor treasurer, of course, I think was Paul Keating. So think about that, the last Labor treasurer. But anyway, so you go, oh yeah, but Labor are terrible with their spending. But hang on a minute, what's going on here? And as I said to you before, there's not a cigarette paper that separates the two major parties. They're both into the vote buying scenario. That's all they care about. Now, what we from the Austrian School of Economics or classical economics believe is that when governments print money, that's the definition of inflation. It later translates to increase prices. So the next slide, I want you to see what's going on around the world with inflation. And you can see there, this slide shows that inflation in the US has spiked. It's off the chart, literally almost. Inflation in the Euro area is off the chart as well, Japan. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see what's going on, I hope, in Australia. And you'll see that, consumer prices are up. Now, you ask yourself, why is it? And they're coming up with what really annoys me is that we've now got this situation in the Ukraine, and everybody's saying, "Oh, the Ukraine fuel prices, that's what is driving inflation." But that's a load of garbage. People like me and people who follow classical economics and who believe that the definition of inflation is when you expand the money supply through money printing. Right? And that's why people like me believe in the gold standard, but that's another story because you can't print gold. We won't go there.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode. We'll do that.
That's a whole other episode. But if you have a look there on that chart, you'd believe that inflation's only about, somewhere between 3 and 4%. And I'll make two comments on that. Firstly, who believes that? Do you believe that?
Look, when I was young, my father used to comment, he'd often comment, and he was pretty apolitical, really. But he used to say this thing: "How do you know a politician's lying? Their mouths are moving."
Well, look, the thing about this is, firstly, the first point I would make. Well, I'll come to my foot. Actually, if you go to the next slide, let's have a look. So that's what the Bureau of Statistics says is inflation. Meanwhile, today in the Financial Review, baked beans, spaghetti up 10 to 20%. Now, 10 to 20%. So we can talk about inflation, and you and I both know that the inflation, people will tell you that, actual real economists, not me, will tell you the basket of goods that they used to work out what inflation was 20 or 30 years ago, they keep changing the rules as to how you calculate inflation. House prices, for example, aren't inflation. But I tell you what, when you're talking about baked beans and spaghetti being up 10%, 20%, now the other thing is that when you talk about what does that mean? One of the things that it means, and I'll come to it in a moment a little bit further, but there's interest rates. People say, "Oh, my interest rate on my home loan is 3%," for argument's sake, or the interest I'm earning at the bank's 1%. But real interest is what we call nominal interest. So the interest that the bank pays you is nominal interest. You've got to subtract inflation. So at the moment, we've actually got negative interest rates. Now, if you go to the next slide. And as I said to you, mate, stop me when you've got slide fatigue, okay? But when you go to the next slide, this is the cash rate in Australia, effectively the official interest rates in Australia. And those interest rates, as you can see, they're for all intents and purposes, they're zero at the moment. And everybody goes, "Oh, that's fantastic. Interest rates are zero." But the reason interest rates are zero is because the government keeps borrowing. And the way the government borrows is it issues bonds. And as we know, bonds are IOUs. So the government writes an IOU and it waves the IOU around and it goes, "Right, who's going to buy this IOU? Because if I sell the IOU, the government gets money and then they can go and bribe the electorate with all the votes they buy." But of course, people go, "I don't want that. I'll buy that IOU off you, but I'll buy it off you at an interest rate that's 3% or 4%. And the government goes, "No, we can't do that. We've got to keep interest rates low." So what happens is they go to the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank gets the money printer. And the Reserve Bank prints money, and then it buys the bonds off the Australian government. So the Australian bank buys the bonds off the bank. It's absolutely ludicrous. Now, what happens when interest rates are zero is if you're a retiree, for example, or if you're any kind of investor, your money in the bank is not showing any returns. So what do? You find other sorts of investment. Now, if you go to the next slide, we all know too well that property dwelling investment has been going through the roof. And there's a thing in investment that they call the TINA principle. There is no other alternative. Instead of, so what we're getting is money is heating up the property sector. And you'll see the next slide has got changes in house prices. And, we know that in certain areas, house prices have gone up 20%. Now, the problem with this is, I haven't got the statistics on how many people in Australia are homeowners versus renters. But this, our Labor Party friends should be concerned. I mean, we're concerned that this is biasing people that own property. If you're a renter, so if you're a wage and salary earner, the nurse, the proverbial nurse, or police, or right, how can you afford to go into the market and buy these properties now? So that's one of the unintended consequences of all this money printing. And you'll see the next slide, the next consequence that hasn't come home to roost yet is that house prices go up, but household debt also goes up. Now, people say, well, that's okay because house prices have gone up as well, and that's offsetting the household debt. But what happens if house prices come off? Now, before you go to the next slide, now I've gone very quickly through those because I didn't want to give you slide fatigue. So
Yeah, no, that's all right.
So what I'm trying to show there is that what we're getting with these super low interest rates is we're getting a distortion in investment decisions, right? So if you imagine a retiree who maybe some years ago could have stuck their money in the bank, if they were really conservative, they could stick their money in the bank and get a return on their savings, and it might just be enough for them to pay their way, right? To give themselves a bit of a living as a retiree. But now, with interest rates being effectively zero, they now have to make risky investment decisions. So they're speculating on the property market, they're speculating on the share market, and that's why we've seen shares go through the roof. Now, the other thing, of course, is that when you've got all this money printing and zero interest rates, the whole effect of it is to transfer wealth from savers to borrowers. And you have to say to yourself, well, intuitively, that doesn't sound like a good thing. People who are working hard and saving are having their wealth transferred to people who are borrowing. Now, that's great for all the young mums and dads out there who are borrowing and getting into their first homes and all the rest of it. We've got this massive distortion in the financial markets, and it is going to cause some problems. Now, the next, the next, if you just go back a slide.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, mate.
Okay. Now, in my world, what I do for a day job, I'm involved. I sort of buzz around in corporate restructuring and company turnaround and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that we're seeing in the last 2 years, and what this graph demonstrates, is in the last 2 years, companies going into liquidation and restructuring, it's virtually half what it used to be. And now that could be for two reasons. Either a lot of companies have used the last 2 years of COVID to repair their balance sheets. That's what I think that's a Pollyanna view. Or we could have what the next slide demonstrates, and that is we could have what we call zombie companies, and that is companies that, for all intents and purposes, gone for all money, but they are being propped up by all this money printing and zero interest rates. And you go, well, that's okay because we're keeping these companies alive. But what the result of that is, if you go to the next slide, we've got this situation. It was in the big news the other day. ProBuild was a large construction company. They collapsed. And the consequences of that now is that lots of subcontractors, the people that you and I mix with, the subbies, the guys that go to work in a ute every day, they're owed money by these construction companies. And now, ProBuild, for one, I don't want to pick on ProBuild, but it's an example where there was one newspaper article a little while back that said we could have put the company into administration years ago. Well, why didn't they do it years ago? The last 2 years, the government's been propping up these companies with printed money, and what that means is that your subcontractor mate that you have a beer with in the pub on a Friday night, they're dealing with these companies in good faith, thinking that they're going to get paid. The company goes broke, and then all of a sudden, your Sparky mate that's in a pub on a Friday night, he's owed a couple $100,000, and he's not going to see that money.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's going to be some of the tragedy with this. Oh, and there's Nick's event.
There's my event.
Anybody interested? Flat taxes and free markets Lynch Symposium on Sunset Parramatta. So, guys, anybody wants to chew on in? There's some more of the details.
Yep.
I'll leave that on the screen for a second. Anyway, I mean we've
mate, leave them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Okay. I haven't put you to sleep, mate, have I?
Sorry.
I didn't put you to sleep.
No, mate. No, not at all. I spend far too much time for a bloke of my intellect and education studying finance and studying things like this. It's tragic to see what the flow on effect for all these things is, and the average voter is worried about the things that are going to affect them day to day. Usually, our governments and I'm going to use the word leader very loosely. Our leaders, they're trying to think 2, 3, 4 moves ahead, but for them, it's not about thinking 4 moves ahead for what's best for you at home in your house, for you and your loved ones. They're thinking what's 5 moves ahead to keep them in that cushy $200,000, $300,000 a year job. And that's where the Lib Dems are very different. Is our guys are there to fight for your liberties and freedoms. We're not. I don't care if I never get elected. Really, in that context, if I can get elected to make a difference, I'm quite happy to go in for a couple of years and get out. I'll go in, try and clean that joint up, sort it out a bit, rattle some cages, and walk out the door.
Well, the thing is, you said it there. There's no, one of our taglines is, of course, real leadership. And if you ask me, it's not real leadership. And as I say, there's only a cigarette paper that separates these two major parties. And all they want to do is print more money, borrow more money, put us into more debt. There's a debt bomb waiting out there, as those slides demonstrated. And they're not showing leadership. All they're showing is their own career building. And they keep kicking the can further and further down the road. So, it's funny. When I first saw our little hashtag real leadership, I thought, I'm not quite sure what that's about. But then the more you look at the numbers, you go, yeah, absolutely. What we need is real leadership. Someone who's got the guts to do what's right.
It comes down to that courage, bravery, the willingness to go, you know what? I'm not going to just buy you off with a happy meal. I'm going to actually say, look, guys, as Australians, if your grandkids don't want to be living in a humpy somewhere in the middle of nowhere, no lights, no gas, no electricity, we need to make some sacrifices. We need to make it now. We need to pare back all this lunatic spending. The COVID hysteria needs to stop. The net zero hysteria, needs to stop. And we just really need to get a really solid grip on reality and start driving things forward. Become a nation that builds things again. We don't build anything. We don't create anything. Our creators and our doers are generally stifled by those who do bugger all.
Well, you know what, Dean? The reason we don't create anymore is because, as I showed you, I said before that when you've got zero interest rates, there's market distortions. So we've got government intervention that distorts investment decisions. If we had genuine free markets, free labour markets, free capital markets, where labour and capital could move around, you'd find that it does become economic to build stuff. But where you've got, ridiculous amounts of intervention and regulation, then what happens is instead of making money by building stuff and, innovation in the manufacturing sector, we go and speculate on property.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, and it's going to cost my son, and it's going to cost his kids. I've got no delusions that these things are going to. They're going to affect me possibly. I'm probably young enough where it's still going to certainly hit while I'm alive in my lifetime. I'm sure of it, but it's going to hit him and his future family far harder than it's going to hurt me, and it will be our fault if we don't do something about it. So. I don't get everything right, but by God, I'm happy to fight for what I consider right, and that's free, not stuff, free markets, free responsibility, free lives to choose for ourselves. Anything that comes from government isn't free. It's a bribe, and it comes with conditions. So exactly. I'd like to see Australia freer. I'd like to see the Liberal Democrats get 5 senators in, possibly even 6 or 7. If a couple more guys get endorsed this week.
I'll take 7.
I'll take 7. Even a few lower house candidates. Obviously, the statistics are a bit harder for guys like Nick and I to get in. But there is one way we can get in. If enough of you people out there band together, invite your friends, challenge people to think, and everybody votes that way. It's that simple. There's the only wasted vote is the one that goes to any of the big parties, because nothing changes.
Exactly.
Mate, Nick, thank you very much for joining me on the Rebellion this evening. We'll be back again next week. We had last week off with all the Lucas launch and the rest of it. I haven't worked out who's coming to join me next week, so I'm sure there's plenty of candidates that may want to come on for a chat. I might even see if John Larder's willing to come on and do it now these big announcements up. Nick Samios, thanks very much. Everyone check out Nick. Obviously, I'm your candidate for the Riverina. If you're in the Riverina area, you want to volunteer, you want to donate money, you want to support, we're going to have a couple of little events. We're going to do some fundraisers. We're going to rattle the establishment to its core, or that's certainly what we're fighting for, and we hope you come on board. Join us at the Lib Dems. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Cheers.